Denmark is considered one of the most responsible global actors, actively contributing to some of the pressing challenges of the world. Now, as one of the leaders when it comes to sustainable development, Denmark does not shy away from sharing its experience or lending a helping hand. And this is reflected in more ways than one when we come to Ethiopia. Hello and welcome to Diplomatic Insights. I am Kirana Baina. Today I have come to the Danish embassy here in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to look at the relationship between Ethiopia and Denmark, the different cooperation areas that they have, and what they have in plan towards cementing their ties going forward. I'll be sitting down with the Danish ambassador to Ethiopia. Do stay with us. Ambassador, thank you very much for giving us the time and availing yourself today. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
So, as you know, Ethiopia and Denmark started their relationship in the 1960s, but there was much missionary visits from Denmark in the 20th century. So I'd like you to please tell us a little bit about the bilateral relationship between Ethiopia and Denmark, you know, the history and what it looks like today.
Thank you, and thanks a lot for inviting me. So if we go back actually to the 50s, we had the state visit by Emperor Haile Selassie to Denmark in 1956 to visit our king and his family. And it's quite interesting to think about now, because what they visited in Denmark are some of the sectors that we actually work with now, also with Ethiopia. So it was like a hospital and a dairy production factory. So some of them go really long back, but it's something we're building on now. And actually the embassy here in Addis Ababa, we only opened in 2004. So that's one of the newer embassies, I would say. And we started our country program with Ethiopia in 2018. So that's also very recent. And when we opened the embassy in 2004, it was actually with a focus on the African Union. And then we have strengthened our cooperation with Ethiopia with a strong country program and many other engagements that we have today.
Okay, so Denmark is known for sharing and as a sort of leader in terms of sustainable development. So my question now is going to be, you know, what activities are underway between Ethiopia and Denmark in terms of sustainable development? Like, what are the areas of focus for these two countries to work on?
So only 2 weeks ago, we had our Minister for Development Cooperation and Global Climate Policy visiting Ethiopia. And it was a very good visit. We were well received here, and I think that also confirmed our strong relations. And he has a focus, of course, on sustainable development in Ethiopia. And within our country program, he is also putting focus on the links between development cooperation and sustainability and climate and the green agenda, which is really interesting in Ethiopia because you're actually also in an African context, one of the forerunners when it comes to green energy and so on. So this was one of the big topics when my minister was here a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, that's right. And it's funny that you mentioned that because he had commented on the Green Legacy Initiative of Ethiopia and more or less had the same remarks as you had, and that it was in line with, you know, Denmark's policy in terms of sustainable development, green energy. So why don't you tell us a little bit, or Denmark's take on Ethiopia's Green Legacy Initiative?
Yeah. So we actually kicked off the minister's visit going to Friendship Park. And we picked that because I think that's a really good way of showing how Ethiopia is trying to make a big city like Addis green. So he was on a walk and talk with people from the Ministry of Development and Planning, and they explained to him how both the Green Legacy but also how the Friendship Park is a small oasis in a big city. And we talked about also how the tree planting is ongoing in Ethiopia, and I think we are very impressed on the initiatives you've made. We also discussed, which is really important when it comes to green legacy, that it's sustainable. That is not only more than, I don't know, 20 million people planting seeds, but that's actually followed up, and that the trees are still there in 20, 30, 40 years, and that you can actually use the trees in the area where you plant them, so that there is a long-term plan about the greener legacy. I think that's an important point for us, and maybe that's also an area where we can help Ethiopia.
Very interesting. So during his visit, the minister also went to war-affected areas. He went to Afar even. And one of the things that he talked about is the damage that was there. And we talked about rehabilitation during the press briefing that he had following his visit there. So now we know that Ethiopia is in a period of rehabilitation following the 2 years of conflict. But before I go into the rehabilitation period, I want you to mention or to comment actually on Ethiopia's peace agreement or the peace process, and what you can say on that.
So first of all, I would like to congratulate Ethiopia on the peace agreement, even though it's back now from 2nd of November last year. But I think we can congratulate Ethiopia because the peace so far has been sustainable. From what I've heard, there's not been one gunshot in Tigray since the 2nd of November. So that's a huge achievement. Last weekend, I saw pictures on social media with the Tigrayan authorities sitting together with the federal authorities talking around a table. I don't think any of us would have expected that half a year ago, even 4 months ago. So that we are, of course, very impressed with. But we are following it really closely. It's still fragile, I think it's reasonable to say, and there is an enormous amount of follow-up, not only to make sure that the peace is lasting and that we don't have any gunshots in Tigray and the surrounding areas, but also in terms of reconstruction of that whole area, both Tigray but also Afar and Amhara, and all the human rights violations that were committed during those 2 years of war has to be followed up with some accountability mechanism, and I know that the government is working on that, and we are also supporting that through the UN, and hopefully this can lead to a very long term, because these things take time, a long-term process of giving the Ethiopian people justice.
Mm-hmm. So now going back to the rehabilitation and what Denmark is doing in terms of that, or in regards to that, in supporting Ethiopia in rebuilding, reconstructing, because these kinds of things, infrastructure, it's hard enough, let alone after 2 years of conflict that has completely destroyed like a couple of regions in the north. So what is Denmark's role going to be like in supporting Ethiopia throughout this rebuilding process?
So Denmark has a country program which is on Ethiopia, which is one of our biggest country programs in Africa. And parts of that will also go to the reconstruction of the northern areas. So one part is on the accountability and justice sector, as I talked about before, and other parts of the program will be to work closely with the social safety nets, with the agriculture sector, with rebuilding school through our cooperation with UN organizations. So there is both, you can say, a soft component, more into the building up of systems that will give justice to the people, and then there is a more hardcore or more like infrastructure support that goes to making sure that the people can also go back to their jobs and their normal lives in these areas.
I jumped to the future without talking about what had been taking place. Is it, can we say that the two years has seen a sort of shift in how the Danish organizations had been engaging in Ethiopia? Because I know that aid is how Denmark sort of engaged mostly in Ethiopia through different associations and organizations. So throughout the 2 years of war, what was that presence like? So
throughout the 2 years that have just passed, we actually had to put some safeguards into our programs because we had difficulties in engaging directly with the Ethiopian government at the same time as a war was going on. We didn't change a penny in the number of money going to Ethiopia, but we had to be sure that development aid went to the people of Ethiopia. And that was something that we had to explain to our taxpayers, the development cooperation comes from Danish taxpayers' money, so they also want to be sure that it's actually the people, the poor people mostly of Ethiopia, who's benefiting from our development cooperation. So we changed some of the structures around our development cooperation to make sure that every penny of this Danish money would go to the people of Ethiopia.
Perfect. So Denmark is known for sort of sharing, and that's through different aid organizations or associations. And now what I want to know is the economic cooperation that Denmark has besides the aid. What is Denmark's economic engagement or investments like in Ethiopia? Are there investments, and if so, in what areas are they focused? Could you give us a bit of a broad, explanation for that?
So one part is, of course, our development cooperation. Another part is our humanitarian support, and that I think is where Denmark is one of the big donors in Ethiopia. We have also supported Ethiopia with soft loans, for instance, to build a windmill park in Asella. So that's a 100 megawatt windmill project where we, through private partners and in cooperation with Ethiopia, is lending you money to build a windmill park. So that's one of the sort of bigger, more private sector corporations. And when it comes to businesses as such and investments in private sector in Ethiopia, we would really like to do more. But so far it has been difficult due to the frameworks for businesses, the forex issue, and I think it would be good with more cooperation in this area. But it's a challenge for many foreign companies, I think, to invest in Ethiopia under the current structures. And I know this is something that the Ethiopian government is also looking into. But this would really help for getting private Danish companies to invest more in Ethiopia.
Okay, so speaking of challenge, since you touched upon it, could you please sort of elaborate what those challenges that you mentioned are, like the challenges that are posed from this side? Now we know that the conflict, the unrest was one of the barriers for any investment or economic engagement. So what other challenges can we mention in terms of that?
So of course, starting, as you said, with the conflict, it's a challenge to invest in a country when there is a war going on. Other challenges would be as I mentioned, the forex, the foreign currency, and the frameworks around investments for private companies. That is also something we get a lot of questions about. We do actually cooperate with the Ethiopian or the Addis Chamber of Commerce. So that cooperation between business federations or business forums, I think, would be a good way forward, both for us to learn more about how your structures are and what you expect, but also maybe for Addis Chamber of Commerce to learn from a Danish Chamber of Commerce. What can we learn from each other? Yeah.
Right, so you said the conflict and then the sort of reforms that Ethiopia is making to the economy, to the private sector. But would you say that following this peace agreement, that the engagement of the Danish companies or organizations has shown a sort of improvement or increment in Ethiopia? Is that a fair statement to make?
It makes a difference, because if you imagine you're a company, you want to invest somewhere in the world, you would not pick a country that is in war. You would pick a country where the security for your workers would be okay, where it's easy to access and so on. Ethiopia has great potential for this, because Addis Ababa is a hub in Africa. It's easy to get here, and there's a lot of areas. We spoke a bit about the green agenda, the climate. A lot of areas of cooperation, I think, between Denmark and Ethiopia. But I think it's too early to say that I already now see Danish businesses moving to Ethiopia. I don't see that yet, but I hope that it will happen in the future.
That's excellent. So how would we put Denmark's engagement in Ethiopia as, in comparison to other EU countries? What makes it different? What's its unique features? What would you point out?
That's a good question. But I think, again, I will go back to talking about the climate and the green agenda. I think a lot of donors and a lot of partners to Ethiopia now wants to support the peace process. and we want to support the peace process as well. To have a peaceful country is the foundation for making sure that we can carry forward. So we will also support this peace process. But Denmark has a comparative advantage when it comes to climate, green energy. And Ethiopia is, as far as I know, also based 90% on hydro, meaning that you actually have already all the raw materials for making your energy sectors green. And this is something where we can really help, because this is something that we've been exploring for years in Denmark and also with other development countries. So I think our comparative advantage is really in the area of creating sustainable green energy and making sure that it's connected with all our development cooperation.
Going forward now, there are different areas of cooperation or areas that the two countries can work on for sure. So what's the plan in terms of cementing ties between Ethiopia and Denmark? What can we expect?
So first of all, we are continuing with our country program in different areas such as agriculture, resilience, building of democratic institutions, human rights. Then we are also fully re-engaging on our cooperation in energy and water. And this is again connected to the nexus or the links between development and climate. So we will, for many of our engagements, we will try to make them even greener, if you can put it like that, but make sure that when we support a farmer in Tigray, that whatever he farms is also sustainable, and it's something that is adaptable to the climate changes, for instance. So if it's a very dry season, we make sure that there is also water being catched, for instance, coming down from the mountains, so he can actually get the benefit of his grains in the right way. So I think you can say our support is there, it will stay, and it will become even greener.
All right, Ambassador. Once again, thank you so much for your time and for your insights today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And on that note, we end today's Diplomatic Insights. We've looked into Ethiopia and Denmark's relationship, their cooperation, what it looks like today, and what we can expect going forward. We've had a good stay with the Ambassador of Denmark to Ethiopia. I was Kirana Baina, leading you through the program. Until next time.